that is most often one of the points where things fall apart. Typically, you're going to have your buyer pre-qualified, right? Before you go out shopping. So you're going to know their buying potential, if their jobs are feeling tight and going to be solvent all the way through the transaction, or if you're on the listing side, if the buyer coming into your contract. But oftentimes where things fall apart, I don't know statistically, I'd just say anecdotal off the top of my head, over 50% of the deals that tank, it's typically out of objections and waivers. We find surprises. So we're going to turn it to Tom to talk about objections and waivers, all 5 pages of it. Take notes, keep those notes, create a binder. We used to do this once upon a time. We're going back to that. Keep a resource of all of these annotated pieces of documents that Tom shares with us with your notes. So when it's time to write your first deals or respond, you're not starting there going, deer in the headlights to Tom. Show him that you respect his time and his expertise and his knowledge and his sage wisdom that he shares with all of us so graciously all the time. He gives 1,000%. Respect his time too by keeping notes and referring back to those when it's time. So without further ado, and just mindful that we're going to have Annette Alvarez talk at the very end of this with a little update on lending. I turn it to Tom Trujillo.
Okay, guys, it's always fun. I know that we just went through the purchase agreement, and I'm glad that Annette is here online with us too, because she constantly gives us a lot of good feedback, which I absolutely appreciate, because we've actually been going through a waivers and objections with her company. So some of this may look familiar to her. We've scratched out names so people didn't see who we're working with, but this is just about as live can be. So, you know, one of the things, hopefully you all have indeed looked at your this, hang on a second, looked at your downloaded annotated program. So if you have not, on the actual download, you can download this. So just jump in, turn your mic off or turn it on if you guys have a question on it. That's probably the easiest way to do it, because a lot of times when I'm going through this stuff, I have a hard time balancing it. And I know Deb follows up a lot with just following up in the chat room as well, answering questions. So we all know we go through a process when you're on the buying side, because you just did the purchase, that you're going to go out and you're going to hire yourself an inspector. And as I've told you guys before, try to have 3 inspectors that your client can contract with. We are very careful with that anymore. In the old days, we could kind of lead people to say, we'll just make sure we've got some going here. Great. That, this is my inspector. Please use this person. We can't do that anymore. Give them at least 3 options. And nowadays, all those inspectors have their online presence as well, so they can pay them over with their credit card. So it's not a big deal. And then we get that famous, wonderful downloaded. Let me make sure I've got it in here. Right quick. Where'd you go? Went away on me. But you'll end up getting yourself an inspection report from your inspector, goes to your buyer, and then you also normally will get a copy. And your buyer will immediately go in shell shock, because they'll get a book this thick of, look at all the things that are wrong with this particular house. They fell in love with the house. Now they see, oh my goodness, there's a drippy faucet. There's a bad roof. There's electrical problems. And you, as a good broker, need to kind of mentor them and soften the blow. Because for the most part, people have to remember they're not buying a brand new house. But all of a sudden they want it to be a brand new house because that inspector has just given them all kinds of bad information, okay? And that is always a scary thought. So just for fun, this is the inspection that we're going to be going through. And you can see, if you've never done one, here's a summary. And it talks about all the things that are in the summary. But the one that you're going to keep your eyeballs on is the concerns, because they're going to actually identify that the roof is in bad shape, that there's a lot of wood damage, there's stucco issues, there's some drains in the sink, there's gas lines, a crawl space. And believe me, as I said, when your client gets this, they're going to be freaking out because this cute, great house that they love, all of a sudden have all these issues in there. Okay? And at the end of the day, you have to really bring your clients to understand, again, they're not buying a brand new house. The things that I look for are things of great safety concerns, things that should be working. This one, for example, the right front burner is non-operational due to grease and grime buildup. Recommend cleaning the igniter. And the other side of the reason that I have concern with that, if one of those igniters isn't working, it may have a potential issue with the gas, right? So the last thing that you want to do is sell this house with a problem with that particular cooktop that may be generating gas. But on the flip side of that, it may be simply that it's clogged up with grease. Okay. Let's see a couple other things that showed up on this house. And I'm kind of flipping through it a little bit. This is always a big indicator. On the roof side, you can see that there's seams on that particular roof broken through. But the good thing is moisture meter shows no concerning moisture level. So you'll see your inspectors go in there. And if you do go open up the door for your inspector, it's none of your business what the inspector is doing. You don't go tell the inspector, look at this, look at that. That's his job. Remember, stay in your lane. This is the time that you want to do that. Your buyer may request to go. That is okay. You can let the buyer and the inspector talk about it. And be careful that they don't draw you into that conversation of saying, well, Tom, what do you think about this roof? You've been selling houses a long time. Well, let's see what the inspector and let's see what the report says. Okay? Be careful of that, guys. Let's keep on going a little bit down here. Door near the dining room entry shows cosmetic damage from a pet. Well, I would venture to believe that the clients who went into the showing that you showed them this property probably looked at it and said, oh my goodness, there's a dog there. Now, is it an issue that you can bring forward to your to the seller and saying, hey, you need to repair it? Might be if it's a deal breaker. But also you might find out from your client, oh yeah, I get that. We have a dog too. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to get down to some fun stuff here where it really got crazy. I know I'm going a little fast for you guys. Don't mean to make you ill as I look through it. This is a fun one for me all the time. It says it's marginal. And basically what they're saying is the manual drain stop sticks during operational recommended repair and adjustment. This particular property had it not only that, but in both bathrooms, and they also had it in the sink. I happen to know that sometimes what they're having to do to fix those kind of drains is cut walls. Cut walls may mean cut tile. So those are discussions you may ultimately have with your buyer saying, you know, how bad is this? Is this really affected? Because they're going to cut, and all of a sudden it could be a more expensive issue. But again, it may be an issue that you want to make sure that the seller's taken care of versus you taking care of. Rule of thumb, just to keep something in mind, is that a lot of times what you find is when you're doing cuts, when you're doing things that are potentially going into the walls or doing roofs or whatever it may be, you might be looking at that with a little bit more scrutiny because you know that as soon as you cut open a wall, what are you going to run into? Particularly if it's behind a shower. You might run into mold. So now all of a sudden it became a bigger issue. So nothing's in granite. This was the great one here. I recognized this. Great property, loved it. But when we went downstairs, there was a basement location. I also looked around there as well, and I saw, this basement is below the surface, and there is a lot of rock and granite. So you just might mention to your client, you know, inspections are important. Maybe even a radon test might be important, but that's up to you and the inspector. In this case, the inspector did do a radon inspection, okay? So not trying to beat this one up too much, just gives you an idea of a little bit what a inspection report is, particularly for all the new brokers. You may have never seen one, but this is what they should look like. And a good inspector today also will be doing these things in sections. And the reason that you want them in sections is so that when you are indeed communicating back to the seller and the seller's broker, you want to be able only to identify the issues in the sections. You no longer send back the entire inspection report. Used to do that. But the sellers, and particularly if you're on the listing side, the seller does not want the entire inspection report. I see you shaking your head, Deb. Well, why do they not want it? Turn your mic on. Tell them why they don't want it.
Because then they've received material knowledge for that inspector's opinion of the property and assessment in a written form, and it cannot be denied or interpreted differently. And so we're not saying we don't want to know that, but that's one inspector's opinion. And once that's been delivered to you, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. It's out.
Disclosing, because at that point, you've now created a disclosing issue. So if you're on the seller side, just deviate a minute, and all of a sudden you see that they've sent or they communicate to you, here's the inspection report. You send it back, so I don't want the entire inspection report. Okay? I only want the things that are pertinent to this concerns that you may have as well. I see some more up there, okay? So keep that in mind, okay, as time goes on. This one here.
Tom, can I jump in here?
Yes, Annette, please.
The lender does not want to see the inspection report. Oftentimes we've had, you know, even seasoned brokers send us, and we don't want to see it. We immediately delete it. That is really between the buyer's agent, the buyer, and whatever they intend to discuss with the seller.
That's correct. And even thinking that, and you know, a little ahead, but truthfully, I know too that the lender doesn't even want to see the ORW. Okay, that's between you guys, between the listing broker and the buying broker. When it's all over and done with, and whatever you decide to do, credit, reduce the price, there may be an amendment involved, and we'll get to that shortly. Okay. I'm just trying to get through real last one here if I can find it. Ah, here it is. This is what I'm looking for. So this is kind of an interesting one because, well, property, we went out to look at the property. The property looked great. Look, oh my God, they got a tin roof. Beautiful tin roof, right? So we're pretty excited about it. Problem was, is that when the inspector got out there, what we thought was a tin roof was a lower quality of tin roof that you use mostly for siding. So it was a concern. So after we looked at that roof and saw what the inspection did, we had sufficient time to call a roofer out there to give us a proposed bid on that, okay? Because you can submit that as well, which goes back to timing. I know that when we did the purchase agreement, one of the comments that I made to you guys was, whatever you do, I mean, the day that you get that thing signed and you work with your client to get an inspector out there ASAP. Do not wait for your deadline objections and going, oh, well, we've got until 15 or 20 days before I have to submit objections. And it's a weekend, I'm not going to worry about it. And then all of a sudden you can't find an inspector and you're down to 2 or 3 days before the objection, before you get your report back. Because that objection may also facilitate the need of you have a plumber out there or a roofer or whatever it may be. Okay, so with that all said, then comes that wonderful thing we all know as the New Mexico Association of Realtor Objection Resolution and Waiver Notice, the ORW that we all love to use in a paraphrase, okay? So the form number, again, on that is 5109. It's a good number to remember because you're going to land up putting that in your purchase agreement. And if you're on the selling side, it's going to be there as well. So you can see it starts off objection and waiver notice between the buyer and the seller. Okay. I partly left the address on that just so that you can see that you have to put the full address there. And we all know how to get that legal description, right? By going into Paragon and going to the tax and finding that legal description. And you can see the notice and agreement is subject to all existing deadlines in the purchase agreement dated the date of the purchase agreement. So that's that whole thing about let's start creating a calendar because this is imperative that you meet these deadlines. And it talks about what the definitions are, the way you can waive, potentially buyer may waive, they need satisfaction or any kind of objections. This is the important part. People say, what does this mean, this box? It's us with the boxes, you know, as brokers, man, we just love boxes. So the type of inspection and documents. Here it is, the inspection report prepared by, and I actually named the company that I used on this inspection, his name, radon test prepared by the same company. And look here, here's the roofing company that gave us a proposal. And this is all objects. It's possible that if you had a super great property without any property, you still may put the inspection there, but you're satisfied. Or there wasn't a radon inspection, you may waive it. You don't have to put all those things in there, but whatever you're using for proof of evidence is what you want to have within that document. And again, you can see the buyer signatures. And don't forget initials. In this case, this is going to be the seller's. And this is where it gets fun. Buyers requested cures. Buyer requests the following cures. The objections is set forth in sections of the purchase agreement. And you can see radon test was performed with an average concentration that was discovered at 11.0. 4.0 is considered satisfied. So this buyer is saying, we're still interested in the property, but guess what? We want you guys to remediate and fix that. All right. The seller in this particular thing said they went out and got a roofer. And just for sake of conversation, it was about $20,000 to do a new roof. And they said, sellers, fix it. We want a new roof. Sellers turned around and said, well, while you're fixing the roof, you might as well go back and, or the buyers to replace all of the wood all the way around that particular house. It had stained, there was some dry rot, okay? They also said seller to replace the hot water heater. It was going out, it's old, fix it. Seller to replace kitchen oven cooktop. Remember we talked about the igniter? Get a plumber in there. Make sure it's not leaking gas. We also went as far, well, if you're going to have a plumber in there checking that out, why not go ahead and check out the drains in the master bedroom and the bedroom? Okay. We also saw that there were some electrical issues, things that were outside around the house. So guess what, guys? If you want to make sure that everything is working, please get electrical out there because we're not electricians, the buyers aren't, and we want to make sure everything is okay. We want a licensed electrician to repair it. And lastly, there was a stray cat that lived underneath the house. The interesting thing was that they had a little area that the cat would go ingress, egress all day long. Yeah. They were nice people. They liked the cat. It was out there in the middle of ranch lands. You know, that cat probably benefited them getting rid of all the mice and so forth. But the downside to that is that also that little crawl space was adjacent to that basement bedroom. And that had even some issues with some doors that actually opened into that crawl space. Very good possibility that a lot of the radon issues were occurring because it was not properly sealed off. So there you go. There's the buyer's objections. Yes, Deb, please.
So might be a good time. I don't know if you want to save this till the end or jump in now. When we're coming back with this type of a detailed response, these 8 points that Tom just covered, consider when you're structuring your offer, initially the dollar amount, and we're seeing more and more, or I'm seeing more and more, as is. So what does as is really mean as far as, okay, is the listing broker going to get bugged because you sent them back this big list and they said, well, we said it was as is and MLS notes, broker to broker, listing office to selling office notes. So Tom, do you want to talk a little bit about that as is stuff?
Sure, because we all have talked about this a lot. There is really no such thing as is in the purchase agreement. You know, now in that purchase agreement, it gives the buyer the right to inspect. So now when they may respond back as is, but you have the right as the buyer to inspect it. Why would you buy a property, waive all your opportunity of inspections and say, well, the purchase agreement, or even in the MLS, they said, buy this house as is. Never give up that right, because you have the right to go in there, and you're certainly not going to waive it, because you could get in a situation such as this house, because on the preface of looking at that house up front in the MLS, I knew this was the house for my buyers. I knew it was, and I knew as soon as I showed them, they were going to go, oh, I love it. That 30-second that you know somebody's going to buy a house is when they walk into that front door and they go, oh, I love it. You know, you got a deal. But we certainly wouldn't go as is, because lo and behold, we found out we had a $20,000 roof repair. Okay. The other thing I should point out here, if you look there, after you do your description of what the issue is, and you're going to send pages, right there it says servo inspection, fascia, flashing, page 46 and 47. You clip that out, you take that page out of the building inspection. That's what you'll be sending back as proof, not the entire inspection report, those pages. And you can see that's why I wanted you guys to have an annotated copy. Servo inspection roof pages 27 to 28. Okay, so as Deb said, you can just imagine what the seller was doing when they looked at that. And they're going, oh my goodness, we already reduced the price already, and now they want us to fix all that stuff. Okay, so they get the right to respond. They get the right to respond. And you can see, I purposely did this because this is relatively new. Party must use an amendment to the purchase agreement to reduce the purchase price or credit funds at closing. And there it is, NMAR 2101. This notice in agreement is not to be used for that purpose. In other words, there's a lot of people who say, okay, this is what we're willing to do, and they want to utilize this document as the final document. Says, yeah, they're willing to reduce the price. What that does, and Annette can jump in here, is in the old days, it would force us to send this document to the lender. Therefore, the lender who is working with the underwriters, they're kind of stuck because they see all the problems with this property. Are you still there, Annette, by chance? I can't see you. She might have stepped away.
Oh, I'm still here, Tom. What were you were saying that if we get this document?
Right. In the old days, this is all we had. Now we have to give you the amendment that states 2101 that says the reduction in dollars and cents, and in no way do you really want the ORW. Is that correct?
That is correct. We just, you know, a lot of times we'll get, hold on one second, I have somebody pounding over here.
Oh, somebody wants to get in their office.
Some work outside. Anyway, I'll get a call from an agent and they just want to make sure how to properly address maybe the price reduction or, you know, the credit that the seller may be giving the buyer. A lot of times, basically what, you know, causes a red flag is, you know, stating anything on an amendment that might say seller to give $5,000 credit due to, you know, mold found in the bathroom. So we don't want anything like that because it'll have to be resolved before, and it could really, you know, bring up a whole lot of stuff.
Okay. So there you guys know, and that's why they put it, and that's why I highlighted, this is not what you're going to use as your final document given to title or to your lender. You know, they've got to go to underwriting. So here's the response back. Seller responds to the buyer's requested cures. Check all that's applicable. Of course, we know that the seller agrees and will cure everything. So if that check mark would have been there, then they'd have taken care of everything that we, as the buyer, wanted cured. Instead, they said the seller agrees to cure only the following to the buyer's objections. Okay. It's got a little unstable there. It is. There it came back. As requested in section 3. The radon. The sellers have a radon mitigation system installed in retest. They're going to do that for us. So part of the reason is they know that that's a major disclosure issue. So even if this deal went south, guess what? They know they're going to have to get that resolved anyway. Then they talked about the roof and the hot water. Those were those demands that we had asked for, either please fix these things, you know, blah, blah, blah. And they basically said the roof, the fascia, and the hot water heater, sellers agreed for a price reduction. And they got real creative here. And or closing cost credit toward the buyer's allowable closing costs, and or for a combination thereof the above of $19,000, so buyer can address repairs to their satisfaction upon possession. I think I told you we sent to them the proposal of the roof repair, which was right at 20 grand. In fairness, although we saw the hot water heater, and this is the conversation I'm having with the buyers, in fairness, we saw that the hot water had some life on it, but maybe it wasn't ready just to go quite yet. So it's still working. So what do we do? The next thing you can see that they also said they would go ahead and they would make sure that the kitchen cooktop was okay and that the drains worked okay. And as it turned out, the seller actually was an electrician, and he would make sure that we took care of all the electrical issues, and that the crawl space would be cleaned out for the seller's barn cats. And additionally, they would pay, which just came out, it was not an objection at the time, seller would pay the buyer's $1,000 transfer of water. So they kind of gave us the 20 grand, if you will, that we looked at. But in truth, we said, let's see how this is all going to work out. So you can see here that the seller agrees to the following, blah, blah, blah. This is what they did to reduce the price, whichever way, or credit. They are willing to do that up to the 20,000. So now it came back to the buyers. Yes, Deborah.
Okay, so this came up while I was out with my buyer when we got a fairly lengthy inspection report back. And the assumption on many buyers' point of the seller has to fix this. And in fact, the seller doesn't have to do anything other than once they've been delivered material knowledge, then they're bound to disclose that. And their client's bound to disclose it too, because the seller's disclosure will need to be remediated and updated once that knowledge has been delivered. So you want to talk a little bit while we're responding to these specific types of things. The sellers, well, it's got radon, the seller's going to have to fix that. They don't have to fix it.
It's true.
But if they want lending on it, or if they want a buyer that doesn't want to go into a house with radon readings over the EPA levels, they're going to have to disclose it. And then it's the buyer's purview and the buyer's lender if they have a lender involved. So, Tom?
Yeah, and you know, when we had that earlier little conversation about as is, technically the seller could come back and says, you're taking it as is. We're not interested. And you can see number D down here. Seller declines to cure any of the buyer's objection as requested in section 3. Check mark, take it as is. And that's a little bit of an educational process and a little bit of a conversation to have with your brokers or your buyers. When you're filling out that first part, all these things, make sure you say, hey, let's look at what they can do, what they can respond back. They can agree to all of it. They can object to it and maybe figure out some dollar amount. They can say, yeah, we'll give you some money to purchase, or they can walk away. Because if you show that and have that conversation with your buyer, it's quite possible that they won't be so nitpicky as saying, we want the plate switches on the light switches that are cracked to be replaced. And people get like that. We can't help it. And it's always a tough place for us as brokers because it's kind of like we're renegotiating the whole contract again, but based on the physical condition of the property. So my goal, I've always said this, and it hasn't always happened, but I try to tell my seller or my buyers, look guys, we really got to pick the top 10 things that will crater this deal, that are no negotiable. Go ahead, Deb.
My position on that has been one of taking it in kind of in a hierarchy sense of safety, structural integrity, essential components, but things that can wait. Like if the dishwasher's not running, is that at the end of the world? Maybe, maybe not. Is it leaking? That comes back up to structural integrity versus just kind of a nice amenity to have versus cosmetic. So I've always kind of taken them in that structure. That's why when Tom started this presentation today, starting with the looking at the report, things that are concerns, really taking that type of hierarchical view and helping your buyers discern what is really essential in your professional opinion.
Right. And if you look at those objections, I concur with what Deb is saying as well, is the radon is a no-brainer. They're going to have to fix that. Preferably the roof is a no-brainer. Then you can start seeing by the time that we get all the way down here to number 8, seller to have professional clean of the crawl space. I knew that if they had walked away from that deal, that the new buyer, he's a pretty brawny guy, he'd probably crawl under there and clean it. Okay, let's keep going here. So that's what they responded back to the buyers. So first of all, just so it isn't quite over until it's over. Because if you're talking to your buyer and they're saying, wow, what does this all mean that they're willing to credit back to us, that they're willing to reduce the price? Do we get any more money on the table? Their concern was, well, if we reduce the price, I still don't have enough money to fix the roof. Well, these are choices. Okay, so my first point was, okay, let's see what we have left. And here was our response. A little overstated, and it says buyer's acceptance of modification. Buyer accepts the provisions of section 4 with the following changes. A little overstated, buyer's in agreement to cures 1, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. One concern that the seller still had that we didn't even address, with the exception of we wanted a hot water heater up there, and we knew that we smelled gas, that the seller was to still have a plumber investigate the gas odor in the mechanical room and provide a receipt or notice that this had been resolved and meets current code. And when I emailed back to the broker saying the reason they wanted this is they got a brand new baby, you can get it, all right? Then the last one, seller to credit closing costs up to $6,000. And the purchase price was now to be $382. If you were to subtract what the original offer was that we had, and now we're low, it comes up to the $19,000. But where the trick was, is finding out what were our closing costs going to be. Remember that famous thing we call the net sheet? You want to go one step above the net sheet, and you want to call, first of all, your closing officer, title, and says, what kind of costs are we talking about on the buyer side now? Well, we have this, we have that, we still got to do the appraisal, we got to do that. Then you're going to call your lender and say, hey, lender, help me out here. What kind of closing costs are we talking about here? At the end of the day, between the lender's costs and the title costs, things that were still outstanding like the appraisal and so forth, it came up to being $6,024 and some odd cents. So I felt comfortable of recommending to the buyer, let's go ahead and take $6,000 of any kind of expenses that you would have had on the closing side. That left us the balance, $13,000 off what the purchase price was, to $382,000. It's a little bit of math. I can help you guys with that if we get to that point. At the end of the day, seller accepted what the buyer offered on the table. So we're moving forward to closing. We still have to go through the appraisal. So what happens now, and let me make a point. That's why instead of just saying $19,000 price reduction, because I could have said seller to credit and $19,000 price reduction, I stated a number. Because now it's in granted that we're buying this property for $382,000. What happens if the appraisal comes in at $375,000? We get another opportunity to renegotiate. So for the seller at this point, he's still a little bit on the defense, hoping, man, I hope this thing appraises now $382,000. Because if it doesn't, we're back to the table again. Okay? So, with all that said, remember way back we talked about we can't use the ORW as the closing doc. Instead, we have to come back to the amendment 2101. So this amendment now says, dated blank date between the buyer and the seller. Price modification. Buyer and seller agreed to amend the purchase price to $382,000. B, seller credits, agrees to credits $6,000 to the buyer. Okay. Go to the title commitment or revision of fees, check one. I went ahead and I checked other the seller to credit closing up to $6,000 because that's what we agreed to on the ORW. And then this one, when it was all signed in the whole bit, we sent that one to the title company and we sent that amendment back to the lender so that my lender wouldn't yell at me for sending them an ORW. Is that correct? I think she's there too. So questions that you guys have with it. I see hands going up. Let's see, whose hand was that first? Oh, Anna B, go ahead. Mike. And mic yourself. Thank you.
Yes. My question is, once that is done, what if the appraisal did come in lower and there had to be another amendment? Would you update that?
No, you still leave it in the tracking and it just becomes another amendment that appraisal did not meet the $382,000 and the appraisal price is now this. And you kind of get back into potentially some negotiation because just like the ORW, let's say it came in at, for sake of conversation, $380,000. Well, it's quite possible the seller's going to say, "Screw it, man. That's as low as I go is $382." That would mean that the buyers would have to come to the table with another $2,000. Okay.
And so there would be another form 2101.
Yes. Another.
Would you have to?
No, not 2101. You just use a regular amendment form to that.
Oh, I see. Okay, gotcha. That was my next question.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? I see a lot of nodding heads. Woohoo! All right. Ms. Deb, did we
yes.
answer all the questions in the chat?
I think so. One, you may have addressed this. I've been back and forth. I got a bunch of stuff popping here, but difference between an amendment and an addendum.
Okay, remember this. In the olden days, we used to say add to the document,
Yeah.
okay, or amend the document. So when you have a purchase agreement and you're changing numbers, that's an amendment, okay? But if you're just adding to it to say, okay, we're gonna do this, this, and this instead, it's an amendment. The coolest thing that has finally happened is that in the infamous wisdom of the New Mexico Real Estate Association, you will now see the amendment addendum is one thing. So you don't have to worry about making a mistake because it says addendum/amendment. That's helpful. Okay. Let's see. I know that Mr. Roblato has been killing it out there these days on a bunch of listings and offers and so forth. And he too has become very knowledgeable about what buying a property as is and what property you can't do. So just remember that, is in the end of the day, when people try to market the property as is, they are giving you a little bit of heads up that chances are they're not going to negotiate off the price, but it still does not mean that you should not have inspections. Always, always have those inspections, because you don't want to be the person liable for saying, oh, wow, this property is only as is. So, you know, there's no reason for you to spend money to do an inspection, because it'll come back to bite you.
Hey, Tom.
Yes. Annette?
I just wanted to bring up, I saw something interesting, and I believe it was Anna B. who brought up something about the amendment based on appraisal. And I hope I'm not out of context here, but this was something new that I saw or hadn't seen in maybe a long time. We're talking Los Alamos property.
Okay.
Let's say the property was purchased at $300,000.
Got it.
And the appraisal comes in at $295,000.
Okay.
And in the contract, it stated before, you know, because Los Alamos is such a, you know, quirky market, it said in the contract that should the appraisal come in below purchase price, the buyer agrees to pay up to $5,000 over. And so, interestingly enough, that's exactly how it worked out.
Wow, that's cool. And did they create that as an addendum right along with the purchase agreement, Annette?
No, they put it right into the
agreement.
Yeah, they just put it right into the body of the contract.
Okay.
They wrote it in as a.
Yeah, I'll have to see where exactly they put it, but you know, when it came in under value, we went back to the contract, and it was like, well, the buyer agreed to pay $5,000 over, so you know, we didn't have to. I mean, he was going to pay for it and go forward with the deal regardless.
Nice.
Okay. Well, I can't remember just because I'm not looking at a purchase agreement right now. If there's space where there used to be a thing called other in compensation. So maybe that was it. If not, if you see it,
I'll look at it right now.
let me know on that. That's a good one. Okay. Who else has comments? Deborah.
I've got a couple. So when you start hearing your potential sellers say, well, I just want to list it as is, you need to be making some early assessments and ideally having some early discussions and powwows with your QB, why they want to go as is. Because if they have material knowledge, back to that, they have to disclose it. And sometimes, even though it feels like it's ripping off the Band-Aid before you're even started, it might be prudent to do a pre-inspection report and just address the issues up front, know what they are, even if the seller's not in a position to remediate, perhaps have money held in escrow to be addressed and repaired during the course of the transaction as a result of the pre-inspection, rather than getting beat up after you're under contract and both sides are feeling like, I gave them too much money, I gave my house away. You start getting that type of contention, especially in a market like this where it's so constricted. It's just a feeding frenzy just to get in on anything right now on so many properties. The people kind of feel like they're coming, especially buyers, from a position of desperation. So back to the flip side, pre-inspections, when you start hearing language as is, to avoid some of these gotcha little surprises during the ORW phase. And then two, the other one is, well, we had some problems with the roof, but I don't want to talk about that, and I'm not giving you permission to talk about that, listing broker. So two little fun ones, Tom.
Yeah, those are fun all the time. The pre-inspection is absolutely an excellent tool in this day in this market. And if you can convince your seller to do it, it's great. Plus, the one thing too, if it belongs to the seller, the pre-inspection, and it's a really clean pre-inspection or a few things needed to be done, the seller has the right to give that to each buyer that comes through because he owns it. Okay, the other way around, when the buyer owns it, you can't. But if the seller does that, and that's even a sell, you can explain the new laws and new issues, but why don't we go ahead and get it pre-inspected, even if it's a beater, because they can go in there and say, this is it. The other side of the story will be too, if you went one step further and you solicited to the new buyer, hey, look, we got an inspection. We know it's not great. We would be willing to give it to you, but that's the reflection of why we have this thing so cheap. Just so you know. So that's always kind of a tough one. Deb, what was your second part of that question? You're not on. I can't hear you. Now I can hear you.
Sometimes that's a good thing. Back to the seller, you're getting ready to take the listing. Well, we've had some problems with the roof, but I don't want to talk about that. We had to take care of.
Yes.
You kind of feel like there's just sweeping under the rug of things.
That's that.
Something's been delivered. So now what?
That's that actual knowledge. That's that actual knowledge. And now they have disclosed to you. And in your contract, you have to talk about adverse issues. So if you have a seller, and we have seen them, and they start talking about the house, say, FYI, anytime that you tell me anything, I now have actual knowledge of the issues, and I have to disclose those adverse conditions. So if you're trying to tell me something that I shouldn't know, don't tell me. But you should also tell them, and by the way, even though you didn't tell me about the roof issues, be prepared. There is going to be, somebody's going to come here and say they want an inspection. And they go, well, I'm going to deny them that. So you really can't.
Because it's as is. It's as is. So they don't need to have a roof inspection because I'm selling it as is.
Well, then good luck. Let's see. We'll put it on there. And guess what? They still have the right to do an inspection. That's the way the contract reads. And you can say, no, I'm not going to fix the roof. But guess what? You may not get full quote offer either. That's it. So part of it is, and I know I've had some real stinkers. Deb's had some real stinkers. I'm sure some of you more seasoned drinkers have had some real stinkers as sellers, but it is an educational process. And there does come that time. I'll get you next, Anna B. There does come that time that you really have to look hard into your soul and say, how bad do I want this listing? How bad do I want this buyer? Yes, Anna B.
Here I am. I wonder about a selling broker who is showing a property and says to me as a buying broker or a transactional broker, he said, this house was under contract 2 months ago, and after the inspections it fell apart. It's no longer under contract. So is it okay for me to ask him why? What happened?
Absolutely, if he's willing to tell you. I mean, that's not necessarily a very good broker taking care of his seller, but if he'll tell you, fine. It's the same thing. We've had this conversation about price. I mean, there, you know, in the purchase agreement or whatever, it may, or in the listing agreement, it states, am I allowed to say terms? Or am I allowed to say conditions? Sometimes brokers, the one thing, man, we have loose lips. But if you're on the side, you're trying to take care of your client, and if they said, yeah, well, yeah, we had an inspection and it really bombed. Really? What happened? Oh, the people didn't want to fix the roof. Okay. Thank you very much.
Right.
And particularly if you haven't made an offer, all of a sudden you may be lowballing it a lot more than they realize it. So it's really, you know, if you're on the listing side, keep your mouth shut unless you've been given permission from your seller. But if you're a buyer, you're trying to gain as much information and knowledge as you can about the property.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, and keep the code of ethics in mind
Right.
too. It's very easy, and I'm right next to the kitchen, so I hear all the water cooler talk. And be mindful of your code of ethics.
Right.
And
Yeah,
who are you working for? You're working for your customer. Be mindful of that and how you might be inadvertently just shooting the breeze at the water cooler and blah, 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 and other ears hear that, and it could come back to bite you because we have such a dominant piece of the market here. Very likely somebody that might be at the microwaves overhearing and getting ready to structure a deal to come in next after your deal fell apart because of whatever.
You know, when you talk about the code of ethics, I appreciate that because everybody's very aware in this day and age about third-party sexual harassment, right? Same thing goes on in the code of ethics. If Deb is talking to Kelly about an individual, as a broker, I can take her to the code of ethics saying, I heard Deb say this about so-and-so. Not cool. So, you know, we've always got to remember, guys, that we want to maintain our code of ethics here at Keller Williams. We always want to have the utmost respect to the other party, your other broker. And the same thing goes if you are in a transaction and falls apart and you have the reason why, you know, keep your mouth shut. You don't need to rock the boat. Okay. Any other questions, Ms. Deb, that you may want to carry on? I think we have Annette ready to talk to us a little bit. Is that correct? Annette?
Hey, everybody. Okay, sorry, I have 3 screens going on and my 2 screens don't have a camera, but anyway, this is such a great class, Tom. I mean, wow, you know, there is so much hanging on this objections, waivers, and resolutions. This is kind of when the rubber hits the road, you know what I mean? So, but anyway, I just wanted to let you all know, I so enjoy these opportunities to kind of share all sides of the picture. And everything is really getting back to normal, even though we're not 100%.